Welcome to Motivated to Lead podcast, helping you become a better leader. I'm your host, Mark Klingsheim. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for our podcast this week. My name is Mark Klingsheim with SEMA Partners. Each week, we interview leaders and they share lessons learned from their careers. Our goal is to help you become a better leader. This week, we're happy to have join us John Houston. John is an entrepreneur. He has started several companies in his career. He has a great personal story of how he and his brother at 11 and 15 were living on their own and how they bootstrapped and started businesses, and just some of the struggles that he's experienced in his life, and that how faith has sustained him throughout his life. He has a book that's entitled Find My Way Home, A Journey to Discover Hope and a Life of Purpose. And we're looking forward to today's conversation with John. John, I appreciate you taking some time to tell your story. And I guess first off, could you give us just a little bit of your background and a little bit of your career history?
Started my first business working with my brother when I was 11. And, man, that's you can read our book to gather more information on that. But really once I graduated from college, I went to work for an investment company, and, I was there about 7.5 years, when really just felt like the Lord told us to start a home building business to reach people of Christ and give to the kingdom. And, so we did that, started that about 16 years ago. And today, God has blessed us and allowed us to steward 7 different companies. And it's a lot of fun. So we say we're in the people business. We're not in the home building business or the title business or the mortgage business. We're in the people business.
John, one of the questions I like to ask my guests is, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give a 22-year-old John?
I think what I would say is slow down and enjoy wherever you're at. What I had no idea of was 7 years that I was working at that investment company, literally learning project management, learning budgets, learning those things. But a big part of me not wanting to be in an office was actually setting the groundwork for what I do today. And so sometimes you can be in a great place if you don't maximize those opportunities that are right in front of you because you're starting to look too far in the future. You'll actually miss some of the things you actually really need to learn and grow and develop. So don't get too far ahead of yourself. Enjoy where you're at. Continue to strive, do excellent work while you're there, and see where that leads you.
You've got a great personal story, and you've written a book entitled Find My Way Home, A Journey to Discover Hope and a Life of Purpose. Talk a little bit about that. You've got some incredible things that have happened in your life, and you've taken some tough circumstances, and you definitely have succeeded as far as in business and in life. But talk a little bit about those early years and just some of the lessons learned in that and your personal story.
Yeah, whenever I was 11 and my brother was 15, and we started a landscaping company in order to provide for ourselves, because our parents had got a divorce and moved to 2 different cities and left us there. We basically had to start a business to actually survive. And so what was interesting about that though is that, he would take me to we would get up in the morning, we would work until school started. He would drop me off at school. He would go to school, pick me up after work. Then we'd work till dark, and that just became our normal way of life. And so really what happened was I actually became very money motivated, and I actually saw my value in how much money I made and how big I could grow these businesses. And so through that, what was crazy about that was that actually became this chaotic life that I was living. I didn't actually know that wasn't normal. And when God started really getting hold of my heart and showing me, man, he had a real purpose for my life, and that wasn't it. That was just the gift. He had given me a gift to create business, but it was to create business to use for him, not create business for me just to get wealthy. And what's crazy about that is it actually ended up taking all the pressure off of me. And so to your listeners, man, what I would say is don't learn that the way I did. God actually had to take me on a journey of losing everything, filing bankruptcy, and getting to a place where I was just completely broken. And I was like, okay, God, I can't do it my way anymore. I'm gonna have to do it yours. And then God could actually begin to restore that. So for me, that whole story is really a story of redemption, because that's when I think my life really began to change, was when I really dedicated my life to the Lord and said, God, I'm denying myself. I'm going to follow you, whatever you tell me to do. Then he could begin to take me on this process of reconciliation. In other words, getting my heart and my thoughts right with him, and in different areas. That didn't all happen at one time. And then he could actually begin to take those areas that he had reconciled me in and actually begin to restore them. So that was in my family, that was in my finances, that was in what I thought marriage was, and there's still areas in my life today that I'm actually still going through that. And so, so through that, really one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is I believe that for me personally, one of the thorns in my flesh is actually money. Paul talks about that. And so I have to really make sure I keep an accountability group around me of spirit-led wise men that can actually hold me accountable to that. And I've got to be okay with it. And I am, because I don't ever want to go down that path again. So I think that's really important.
So some of the lessons you learned at 11, I mean, that's pretty amazing to be basically on your own as a not even a teenager yet, with your brother. And what are some things that you've, through that experience, has kind of helped you as far as later on in life, the grit, as far as to be an entrepreneur and starting businesses? Is that kind of kept you motivated as far as to know kind of where you started?
Yeah, it does. I mean, one of the things that I would say about my parents too is that they did teach us great work ethic. I do believe you've got to work hard. God's just not going to send it to you in the mail. And so that was really one of the best benefits and the best things that I learned is that sometimes you just have to actually pull your boots up and get after it and not wait for somebody to do it for you. But, so even once I became an entrepreneur and really begin to grow in that, what I realized was I actually had to realize, what am I really gifted at and what am I good at? And then I need to lean on other people when they're better at certain areas than I am. And so, in the beginning, when I first started my first business, I couldn't afford to hire a CFO. I couldn't afford to hire some of those other people. But what I could do is I could go find a CPA that would allow me to pay them X number of dollars a month, that I could ask wise counsel questions, and they could help me with some of those financial questions that I needed. And in the beginning, I paid them by the hour. I was just like, if you'll give me an hour a month, I'll pay you. And so I found some different ways like that. And so I think the thing that I learned from 11 until really, really got going in these businesses was it's okay to not be great at everything. I don't have to know everything about everything in the business, but I have to know who to ask. And I need to have those connections. And I've got to follow the Lord. Because for me, that is, I'm not for sure if your audience are believers or not, but what I can tell you for me, that's really the hardest lesson I learned is all those years I was doing it on my own and for myself. And when I really hit the ground, hit the bottom, I actually realized, man, I can accomplish far above and beyond anything I can think or imagine with Christ. But without him, I can't do anything. One of my favorite passages is Psalms 24:1 that says the earth and everything in it, including its people, are God's. And so when I really realized, the real question is really an ownership question. So if I don't actually even own my own life because I've dedicated it to Christ, then really he's just asking me to steward this life for him and for his glory. And so that's actually how I live my life and have for the last, 25 years. And man, the amount of pressure that takes off of me to just go, because the definition of stewardship is managing somebody else's estate. So if I can just follow John chapter 10 that says my sheep will know my voice and follow me, if I can learn through the study of scripture, through prayer, how to discern, is this the Lord directing me down this path? If I can seek wise counsel to help me make wiser decisions, man, I just believe we can accomplish so much more, and we don't have to carry the weight and the pressure of trying to make everything happen, figuring out where the money's going to come from, figuring all that stuff out, but really just learning to depend on God. And I know sometimes that I can make it sound easier than it is, but for me, it's really just learning to practice that on a regular basis. And so I just turned 50 last year, and I still follow the premise that I've got to continue to make sure I'm spending time with God like that at least 4 to 5 times a week, so that I'm spending more time with him than I am not spending time with him in a week, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So talk a little bit about the idea of generosity. I think it's something that some of the best leaders that I know are generous people with time and their finances and that. But talk a little bit about that around the importance of that as a leader.
Yeah, I think I'll go back to my story. One of the turning points for me was when I was standing in a grocery store. Had never given anything above my tithe, and I was standing in the grocery store in line, and I felt like that the Holy Spirit said, "Hey, I want you to buy this lady's groceries behind you." And I only had $13 in the bank. And I remember looking out of the corner of my eye, and this lady was dressed way nicer than I was. And I thought, man, this lady doesn't need me to buy her groceries. And I felt like the Lord spoke to me and said, "You're right. She doesn't need you to buy her groceries, but she needs to know my love. And that's why I want you to do it." And I think that kind of rocked my world, that I'd never actually thought about that. Fast forward some years, once we had actually got in the business, we're making a little bit more money. We kind of got to a place, because the first 5 years we were in business, every year I would go away and I'd pray and I'd say, "God, how much do you want us to give this year?" And so we would have, just like we had our strategic goals for our business, we had our strategic giving goals as well, on top of our tithe, not just our offering on top of our tithe. And what was interesting about that, though, was I got to a place 5 years later that God said, "Hey, man, it's time for you to get off the milk and onto the meat." And man, anytime God's ever said that to me, I already know this is a correction moment. What am I going to learn? And so I said, "Okay, God, what are you trying to teach me?" And he said, "Now, remember the ownership thing we went through?" He said, if I'm the owner and you're the steward, shouldn't you be asking me how much I want to pay you to do my work? And I was like, "Yeah." So I had to pray through that, first of all. And then he said, "So the real question is, you should be asking me, God, how much do you want to pay me to do this job? And then the rest of it is yours." And I know this is the honest truth. I have seen God do far greater things since my wife Tracy and I began to live that way, and all of the rest of it is God's. And that same year that I took $100,000 pay cut because God said, "You're making too much," so I had to go home and tell my beautiful young wife, "Hey, we're taking $100,000 pay cut." That we were doing that, man, the way God has moved is crazy. That same year, we still had student loan debt. We still had car payments, and miraculously, somehow, God paid all that off. And I still look at that, and I literally I couldn't even do the math to figure out how that worked, but it did. That's all I know. And so generosity to me is really more about the attitude of the heart. And when we look at it, less about what are we holding on to, and more about what does God really want me to do. And so that's why I love the passage, just give out of your heart's desire. And so to this day, we just had a meeting last week with our executive team, and they said, "Hey, here's our giving goal for the year based on what we do." And I was like, "Well, man, that's not my giving goal. My giving goal is over 10% higher than that. So you guys are going to have to figure out how to raise the bar, because we got to go higher." And so it's this whole attitude of the heart is the easiest way to say it is, man, I just want to please God. And I love just giving and seeing people's lives impacted. And like you said, at the beginning, it's not always with money. There were times in our lives we didn't have, all we could do was pay our tithe. And sometimes that is actually serving people through your time. It's being there mentally, physically, spiritually in the moment, and sharing your heart and just sharing the love of Christ with people, with gentleness and respect, so they can see Jesus in you, which may be the hope that they need that day,
So talk a little bit about just some of the lessons you've learned leading people.
I think as a young leader, one of the things that I think I had backwards is that I was so focused on the growth of the business and so focused on where I was going that sometimes those people that actually cared the most about me, that were bought into the vision, I didn't actually love them and serve them very well, because I was so focused on us getting to our goal. And so over the years, one of the things that I've had to learn is I've got to put God first. I've got to put my family second. I got to put the people third. And then I've got to put the goals in line there, because, man, you can drive your people, you can drive your leaders so hard that they're not believing in the purpose that you have. And sometimes as leaders, and I say this to myself, so I don't forget, many times as a leader, I can get so focused on the purpose and fulfilling that purpose that I want to give this much to the kingdom this year, and we need to reach these many people, that I can forget that I'm not actually doing that in love. I'm not actually doing that in kindness, and they're not actually seeing Jesus in me. And even Corinthians says, man, without love, it's all meaningless. And so that's actually, I'm sure you've heard that, your whole life, regardless of who's listening to this. But man, when you really take that to heart and slow down, and actually think about it day by day, it actually to this day makes me lead different. Because so many of I did it to my own family, but I also did it to my leaders. I led a lot by law instead of by love. And so they knew what not to do, but they didn't know that I loved them just because I loved them. And so I would say that's a big lesson that I learned, and in all honesty, learned the hard way, because I lost some great relationships because of that.
So as you're continuing to grow in your leadership, what are some of the books that you recommend to your leadership team and to other leaders?
Yeah, I'll tell you, my first and foremost book that I would encourage any leader to really read and study is the Bible, because that's what changes my life. But I'll tell you, the two books that actually probably changed my life the most was a book called The Blessed Life by Robert Morris. And another one is called Beyond Blessed, which was also by Robert Morris. And I just think the way he breaks down really stewardship is pretty phenomenal in those two books. And it really just resonated with me. And part of it, to your listeners, one of the reasons why it probably hit me is, 1 Corinthians 6:9, talks about don't be greedy. Well, I know I was. And so I can actually put my name in that verse and say, that was me. And so I think that's part of the reason why those resonate with me so much. But why they have changed the trajectory of my life as well, and I also love, John Maxwell and almost any of his books, I think are really great. They're real practical things that we can actually really apply to our lives. So he's got a lot of great options as well.
Yep, absolutely. So outside of work, what do you like to do to recharge?
Man, my favorite thing to do actually is travel with my family. We love to go travel around the world, see different cultures, love to walk around different countries and see where the people actually live, and the way they live and interact with them. That is a lot of fun. I love to hunt. So big hunter, but really even the hunting, it's less about the kill and more about the fellowship that we get to have with those other people that are with us, because that's just a great time of just relaxing and talking about what's going on in life. So that's fun.
So what parting advice would you give? A lot of our listeners are either first-time CEOs or new leaders in an organization. What advice would you give them?
I think the advice that I would give you is, keep some accountability partners around your life that you really value. And I know one of my mentors taught me, and I've done this for a long time, is one mentor might not be able to hit all the areas of life that you have. So for me, I actually break my mentors and my accountability up in a couple of different ways. So I measure my life spiritually, relationally, financially, and physically. And so it's easy for me to just keep track of those four. And I have different mentors, different people that I reach out to for wise counsel in those areas. And that's really helped me because each one of them are gifted in those areas. So I look for those people, those spirit-led wise counselors that are gifted in those areas. And so that's probably the biggest one. The other one that I would say is that I probably have seen the greatest results off of is be real with your people. When you fail, tell them you failed. Tell them what you learned from it. Because what that allows them to do is have the freedom to admit when they fail, and that they don't have to act like they've got it all together all the time. And so when we lead the way on that, I believe we actually become the lead servant. And we have to remember, man, Jesus came to serve, not be served. And so that's kind of the approach that I take is, man, I'm here to serve you. How can I serve you? And then I think they follow that as I lead them that way. So that's probably the biggest advice I've got.
So how would somebody learn more about your company and about your work and in your book?
Probably the easiest way is to go to meetjohnhouston.com. And man, you can follow us on the blog there. You can also find us. You can find my book on there, and you can find it in most any major retailer or on Amazon. But yeah, man, we'd love to connect with you. There's a spot on our Meet John Houston site that you can actually, send us questions, let us know you're wanting to contact us and connect, and we're there.
Great. Well, thanks, John. This has been fun to talk to you and hear your little bit of your story, and definitely encourage people to pick up your book and connect via your website. Wish you continued success in all you're doing.
Hey, thanks, Mark. Man, I sure appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for listening to the Motivated to Lead podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes. You can also see a video version of this interview at motivatedtolead.com. This podcast is brought to you by SEMA Partners, helping you find your next great leader.